Welcome to the first session on industrial cybersecurity. So we've taken a look as to how one could extract value leveraging AI, digital twins, data history, and now we're looking at how you do this in a secure way. And I'd like to welcome to the podium Jeff Brown, the moderator for the session, and also the sponsor, Fortinet, for the session. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As I said, my name is Jeff Brown. I'm the Regional Director of Operational Technology. I'm happy everyone is here today. Today's title, obviously, is the Compliance versus Security, Managing Risk in an Evolving Digital World. So kind of the abstract for today is, in today's digital world, transformation is driving change that requires, energy delivery systems to be more cyber resilient. Reliable energy delivery requires access to data to improve efficiency and meet some of these compliance requirements. But does compliance ensure resilience? That's one of the things we're going to discuss today. And with transformation comes an increase in industrial systems connectivity to enterprise IT networks, and that is expanding that attack surface and introducing risk to business. So again, can compliance protect you from a cyber attack? So with that, I would like to introduce our very talented and I don't say contestants, but our panel. Dwayne, if you could lead off and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, Dwayne Edwards. I'm currently working at a Tenable vulnerability management company, but have spent the last couple of decades in one way, shape, or form, either in IT or OT security. Primarily in technical sales.
Fantastic. Mario?
Yes, Mario Chiok. I worked for Schlumberger for about 40 years. I started there like 1980 and as a waterline field engineer. So I've been working up in the oil wells. And I moved my way up all the way to become a CISO in 1999. And in 2020, I retired. So after integrating IT, OT, and physical security, after that, I rested for about a year, and then I started working as a consultant for Integrity. So currently, I am the chief of staff. My role is to actually get the new security professionals and coach them and train them into the latest technology and pass on a lot of my experience. So, thank you.
Fantastic. And last but definitely not least, Mark.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, Mark Cristiano here. I currently serve as the Global Director for Rockwell's Cybersecurity Services business. We focus on all elements of OT cybersecurity. And I've been with Rockwell for about a little over 20 years. And I've been in this business for 10, and I spent 10 in the software business. And then prior to coming to Rockwell, I spent 15 years in IT at a couple different manufacturing companies. I was the IT director there. It's great to be here.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, let's jump right in. So with everybody on the panel, what is at risk for energy organizations? And then kind of the second part of that is, so how do you quantify the risk? So, Dwayne, I don't know if you want to take that first bit.
Sure. I mean, in a nutshell, everything, right? I mean, if we look at things that are happening on the global stage, and particularly in Europe right now, when we see, kinetic warfare, we also see a lot of cybersecurity attacks, and those attacks, when they are directed toward energy producers, right, you're looking at effects that range across all of society. You can't heat, you can't cook, you can't pump water. It's a risk that really is societal.
Very good. Mario, Mark, second part, how do you quantify that risk?
Well, Jeff, our approach at Rockwell, and we've done this with many customers, is it's basically a four-pronged approach, four-step. The first and most foundational step is you need to identify the assets in your organization that need to be protected. Okay, that's the attack surface, as they call it, or if you're a zero trust guy, that's the protect surface. There's many solutions out in the market that'll do that today very effectively, using different technologies, if you will. So that's the first step. The second step is that you need to identify the vulnerabilities and the criticality associated with those vulnerabilities for all of those assets that you just identified. And that's where a lot of customers of mine stop. But you're not done yet. You've got a couple more steps that you need to do in order to effectively create a plan to help protect those assets. The most important step, in my opinion, is you need to then prioritize those assets. Not every asset needs to be protected the same way. So what that really requires is a deep understanding of the process. What are the critical processes and what are the assets that actually run that process? They have to go to the top of the list. That's really important. And then from a quantification perspective, there's different ways to then take the high priority assets, the vulnerabilities and the criticalities associated with those assets, and then run them through an analysis and there's a lot of different formulas that you can use to create a score. Bottom line is it's all relative. You're going to get a baseline score. And then as you start to put in remediation tactics, that score needs to start to go down. So that's really our approach. And that's what we do with a lot of customers. One last thing that I'll say in terms of assets and the vulnerabilities, I see many times IT organizations will scan the network for the assets, sometimes actively, and they bring the plant down. Well, that's a conversation for a different day. And then they'll come up with 1,000 different vulnerabilities, and they'll say to OT, hey, when are you going to patch all these vulnerabilities? That's the wrong question. This prioritization is really important. Less than 10% of vulnerabilities need to be patched now, and many never need to be patched. So it's complex, but it's definitely achievable if you kind of follow that 4-step process.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it a little bit. Do you think, I mean, obviously IT will see everything as a risk, but do you see the risks from IT? Are they that different from OT? And, what would you classify as the difference between the kind of IT and OT risks as a subset before we let Mario have a kick at the can?
Sure. So the risk is slightly different. IT has really mature tools, and you can do a lot of things in IT world that is just normal day to day, and you have to be very careful in the OT world how you do that. Now, in the OT world, you can also impact a lot of different things. So just to complement what Mark said, I think having an inventory of the hardware is very important. But today it's also equally important to have an inventory of the software, as well as the impact of any specific asset that can have into operations, day-to-day operations. I would also like to talk about business. We need to understand that in IT, many times we look at trying to make everything 100% secure, but in OT world, we have to make sure that we allow the business to make money and make a profit. So you have to be slightly different. You need to test for resiliency, you need to build, but not all assets are created equal. So you need to actually make sure that you have a good inventory, like I say, what the impact to the business any specific asset or software may have. In addition to that, I think it's also very important to make sure that you follow regulation and compliance, because if you don't follow regulation and compliance, you can get shut down or you can get fined. And as we can see in Europe, a lot of very deep fines are starting to come out, and it will continue to move that. One last thing I wanted to mention is in the OT world, there are some damage that could actually damage physical infrastructure. So we need to make sure that we protect those things that could potentially damage any physical infrastructure.
Sorry, Mario.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think what Mario touched on, Jeff, is really that it's the key, and it's the impact of a breach on IT versus OT. Look, at IT is all about confidentiality for good reason, right? I mean, you've got financials, you've got personnel records. an impact on IT, while it can be very, very damaging, no one's going to get hurt. In OT, the potential exists for someone to actually get hurt. Availability is the priority in OT. So if you're down, and I think Dwayne touched on this perfectly, especially in the energy sector, it's not only the organization that could get hurt. You got people who won't get really, really crucial goods and services, right? So it's really that impact analysis that really, I think, spells the difference between the remediation strategies from either side.
Right. And actually, that kind of leads into the next question is, how do you think the exposure with Volt Typhoon is going to impact the energy organization's risk of tolerance? So for our audience, if you don't know what Volt Typhoon is, it is a state-sponsored attack where the attackers are actually doing what's called living off the land, and they're hiding inside the systems and are very, very hard to detect. So they're doing things like copying shadow volumes and using techniques like pass the hash and staying hidden for a long period of time. They were discovered, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was June, July of last year, maybe even May of 2023. And it has caused some serious concern within the energy industry. So, Mary, if you want to jump in on this one.
Yeah, so I believe that, this is a nation state that is preparing for the future, and they're not necessarily trying to do any damage at this moment, but I call it like putting sleeping cells into critical infrastructure. Now, they are actually taking advantage of many companies not actually updating their hardware, and they're still running with outdated OSs or outdated VPNs or firewalls. And I think it is very, very important that if you are running an outdated piece of equipment, you really need to make sure that you have some mitigation controls or a roadmap how you're going to bring those up to date. The second issue that I find with this is that there may be many, many companies that may be affected by this and they just don't know. I mean, this was brought out by a third party. They actually found this, and many companies were not aware of it. And I believe today there's still many companies, especially in the electric grid, that may be affected by this. They just don't know it. So I think we just need to find ways to detect this. From the mitigation perspective, one of the things that I personally recommend is to restrict egress. It is completely crazy that in many of the OT environments, once people are in the network, anything can go out, and there is no restricted egress policy. So I think that's one of the things. The second thing is in the OT environment, we're still using single factor authentication. And many people I talk to, they argue with me that there is not possible to do MFA in the OT environment. And I have a cookbook on different ways how you can do MFA in the OT environment. And last, I would say many equipments, they have a shared username and password only. And these are the equipments that once they get in, if they can do lateral movement, they can actually get to it with just default username and passwords. And so the other thing is monitor for indicator of compromise in the egress. Many companies have a very good security operations center, mainly monitoring the IT environment for all the attacks coming in. But a lot of the OT indicators of compromise are not being looked at. So I think that's this is real. And I just came back from S4 conference in Miami, and there was a lot of talk about how companies are being breached, and they just don't know it. So that's I think it's important to be able to identify this.
Look, you can use Volt as an example, but basically the approach is very similar from breach to breach.
Yep.
Depending on who you ask, the average number of days that a customer has been penetrated without any symptoms is in the hundreds of days before you actually get hit. Jeff, you mentioned all the intel that they gather before they actually strike, right? So, what we advocate too is, and I think Mario alluded to this a little bit, is do a compromise assessment. Just because you haven't been hit doesn't mean there's someone that's not in there doing something. And there's different services that can be offered that actually, as I said, called compromise assessments that help identify breaches that haven't actually resulted in any downtime or anything, serious.
Mhm. Not only that, but also, if you ask companies, how long were you compromised, and they tell you 365 days, and in reality, it's 2 years. But the only reason why they say 365 days is because the logging policy only keeps log for 1 year, right? So,
No, you guys are 100% correct. And Mario, I really like your comment about egress. I think that is something that you are 100% correct. I think a lot of companies look at what's coming in, looking at indicator of compromise, looking at traffic within their network, but they aren't monitoring anything going,
I mean, a breach like the SolarWinds could have been avoided very easily by monitoring the egress, right?
Okay. And that's a really interesting topic, and I think we could talk on that for a while. But kind of one of the things we, kind of the main tenets of what we're talking about today is, what do you think is the difference between compliance and security? Anybody can jump in on this one if you like.
I'm happy to run on this one. So for me, compliance is about meeting minimum requirements to comply with regulations, standards, and policies. And cybersecurity is about protecting a digital asset, and that could be the hardware, the network, the data, and basically secure by design, secure by default, and securing operations. So the problem that I have found, at least I was working on the trenches, it was a lot easier for me to get money or funding to meet compliance, because if you don't meet compliance, there could be consequences. However, fighting to get the funding to do proper cybersecurity was a lot more difficult. So my approach was use compliance to get the start funding, or at least to get the visibility that I needed. Once I had the visibility, I could actually argue that I needed to do more security. So, but the bottom line is, you can be compliant and not secure, and you can be secure and not compliant. So that's my point.
So does this kind of go back to what Mark was saying earlier about, doing a survey assessment or
Yes,
what have you? Mark, if you want to elaborate on that.
No, I mean, I agree with Mario. Compliance is a checkbox from what I'm, it doesn't hurt. I mean, you're at least taking some action, but you're not done. Everybody thinks, okay, I'm NERC compliant, I'm done. But it's really that curve afterwards of getting funding to really finish the swing that you really have to concentrate on from a customer perspective or from an organizational perspective.
and it takes a lot of education at the executive level and the board of directors to make sure that they understand. I mean, I have had situations where the executive of the board will tell you, well, we pass SOX, so we must be secure. And say, no, SOX is only a little checkbox that you have done the minimum requirement. At the same time, I have had instances where executive or board members have said, well, we spend millions of dollars in tools like SAP and Oracle. They must be secure because we spend so much money on them. And reality is, a lot of these large companies, they are the least secure and not secure by default, right? If you want to make it secure, you have to spend a lot of extra money, a lot of consulting dollars to make it secure.
Yeah. Dwayne, is there anything else you think you'd like to add?
I'm sorry, I had some technical difficulties. I had
Okay.
off there for a minute, so my apologies. Not right this second. I'm joining.
Okay. No worries. Kind of on this level, actually, Daniel's actually asked, what are the most relevant regulations at the international level? I mean, obviously we've got NERC CIP in kind of Canada and the US. What about kind of international? I'm going to guess Europe, EMEA, that type of thing. We got two global folk on here, so.
NIS 2 is just starting up in England, France, and Germany, and probably in December this year it will be global for the EU. So that's another regulation, and EU is very big at finding big dollars fines and you don't comply.
Yes.
So.
Not necessarily, compliance, but obviously 62443 is something that's global, as well as ISO 27001 as well. Those are a couple others.
And then I guess that actually leads us kind of know, what is the role of governance and who owns that for an organization? Is that going to be an IT? Is it going to be OT? Do you think there's going to be a hybrid for both? What do you think is going to happen there?
I think it's a great question, and it's one that every organization struggles with. So, we spend a lot of time, and by the way, unfortunately, there's no right answer of ownership. There are opinions, if you will. So we work with customers all the time, and we hold what we call IT and OT workshops. That's the one answer, though, is both have to have some level of responsibility. And we get the two teams together. We're not selling anything, we're educating. And I spend a lot of time in IT, so I get them together and I say, hey, OT, stop plugging things into the network and crossing your fingers or doing this or doing that, not using passwords. I say, stop it, because something bad's gonna happen. And I say, you need these guys, IT, especially from a governance perspective, because they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. They have governance processes that you need to start to embrace on the OT side of the infrastructure. And then I turn quickly to IT and I say, hey guys, when you come into this environment, tread lightly, because you're going to see things that you've never seen before. You're going to see safety data, motion data, things that you're not used to. So, and it's just that kind of dialogue. A lot of times they haven't met each other. And really, that's the kind of the jumping off point that we work with enterprises on to try to determine, put a ratio together. Okay, what's our current landscape? What do our respective organizations look like? What are the gaps that exist in the organization that we need to fill? And it's usually very, very productive. They finally put on the shoes of the other organization. And that's really, like I said, you have to have a cross-functional team of IT and OT these days in order to be effective.
I mean, Mark's spot on there. And I think it's, IT has a huge sort of head start, right? They've got the processes and everything else. And I won't repeat all the words he said, but the couple trends that I see is in maybe larger organizations, there are more and more likely to have a chief risk officer or somebody who is just very focused on risk and the whole portfolio of risk across the entire enterprise. I think that's a big step forward rather than siloing. And look, right, there's a lot of different business risks besides just cybersecurity. As usual, also, right, the insurance folks are getting involved. More and more of the sales calls I'm on these days is, hey, I got, my new yearly survey, and now there's all these OT things on there. So you look, and from my standpoint, particularly, we all have mixed feelings about compliance and how good or bad compliance is. But at the very least, what I'll tell, particularly my personal friends, not just my customers, is, here's a place where we can justify budget. Here's a place where, we are, I think most of us, or hopefully most of us on this call, are very concerned and want to do all the right things in terms of security. And one of the hardest things we have to do is secure budget. And quite often, let's not make compliance a checkbox, but let's make compliance a way to leverage those things to get the right things done so that we can secure our critical infrastructure.
I'm glad you brought up insurance, Dwayne, because lately we've been working, customers are always struggling with, how do I define the business case for cybersecurity. And this is one of the newer levers that we're pulling with customers, that if you can show an insurance company that you've taken proactive steps to remediate risk, your premium will go down. So that's a financial lever that can be leveraged among many others, obviously, but it's one that we've kind of dialed in on. That's relatively new. That I'm kind of glad you brought up the insurance aspect of things.
So, kind of on that note, when we were talking about governance and talking about hybridized IT/OT, from past experience, how long does it really take these groups to kind of mesh and actually start working together? I know in the past there was obviously some animosity between each other.
I went in that route, and it took me about 3 years to get to become friends between IT and OT, and I had to actually get about 25% of the people cross. I call it the exchange system, where I got people from IT security working in OT, and people from OT moving into IT. And it took them probably about a year to realize and understand that things were different than whatever they thought it was. And yes, there are things that can be done in OT that in the past people thought it was not possible. So I think that is very, very open. But I want to go back to the previous questions about governance.
Yeah.
And I have used governance to be able to leverage that and be able to have IT and OT working together, because it was no longer the IT folks or the CIO mandating things. It was the governance that was doing this, and the governance was being run by enterprise risk management, which they actually report to the CFO.
Makes sense. So, since we're still on the topic, and actually Jack in the chat section kind of mentioned it as well. Regulations and security policies are kind of moving, changing, being updated. How does an energy organization balance regulations and security policies? So things like, you already mentioned it. I mentioned NERC CIP, but NIS2, NIST CSF v2. IEC 62443, we kind of mentioned them. How do we balance that? But what do you also think, from Jack's question, are kind of the most relevant for OT, IoT in the US and the EU and Canada and internationally?
I mean, especially here in the States, of course, NERC CIP, right? And anytime there's a government entity involved and they're coming in and auditing and you're doing these things, those are going to be highly relevant. And look, I think we all know, I think something was written a couple centuries ago, and we've all borrowed from each other since then as well. So, looking at some of that and rationalizing it to say, where do I meet many of these things? That's an important thing. And then really, these, in my mind, are always just starting points, right? Read any of these, and it's a foundational direction. It's not telling you what you need to do specifically. It's just saying, hey, dude, monitor the network, right? Well, that could be a lot of things. And we all have, our own particular product, our own particular opinions on how to do that. We don't love very prescriptive regulations. And yet at the same time, we have to take the sort of build a matrix approach and deal with it from that standpoint. I know that's not an ideal answer, but it's kind of the best I got.
I also use the matrix approach because we have a lot of different regulations and there's a lot of overlap between them. So what we like to do is don't have to do everything over again. And by inputting the findings in one centralized place, we can actually find out if we're compliant or not with specific regulations. For example, the TSA SD02, it came out of incident with a pipeline, and basically most of the information that we needed for that was already in the database. So all we had to do is create a view for TSA SD02, and then we could find out, yes, we are compliant, maybe we are 80% compliant. The rest of them, we just need to make sure that we get up to speed. So that's, I think that is the best way to do it. Otherwise, doing it individually is a lot of work, and that's never ending. My last reasoning that I have is a lot of the things we need to automate. This notion of having a once a year audit is giving the bad guys an 11-month of opportunity. So we need to make sure we are continuously monitoring and continuously compliance. And if something goes out of compliance or out of specs, it needs to be remediated. Tickets should be created automatically, and remediation should be acting to it very quickly, not waiting for the next audit.
Just a general observation here, specific framework aside, there's a lot of confusion in the industry. Dwayne, you alluded to this, and I hear it every day. Ambiguity in how they're written. How far do people need to take things? How do they know when they're done? I think that causes a lot of confusion. Do I even have the systems available to be able to report what I need to report? Things like that, right? And the SEC regulation that came out in the end of the year last year, I had a customer had a major breach right after that. They weren't sure if they needed to report, but because they were public and it was pretty significant, they reported. Well, so the government flagged the reporting as a national security threat. So they had a lot of visitors that came in really, really quickly to work with them on this. And then when they went back and actually looked at the letter of the law, they didn't actually have to report. So, I mean, it's just an example. We gotta, to your point, Dwayne, nobody wants like really, really prescriptive, to the cross T and dotted I. But I think we've got an opportunity to provide more clarity to the industry in terms of what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done, and when does it need to be done.
I mean, I think we all want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But if there's a pushback, it would be from my customers. Again, it's, hey, my auditor that has worked with me for years, he retired, did something, whatever. I've got a new auditor. And of course the auditor then wants something completely different. So if there's a pushback or a message, just like, can we get more clarity, and can we even just have some rational standards that the auditors all sort of look at these the same way? I think that's a thing that's particularly concerning.
So kind of on that, Mark, when talking about regulations, when we talk about kind of cybersecurity is people, process, and technology. I think personally, people and process are probably the two hardest, and sometimes we need those regulations as that stick to change the people in the process. Do we need more stick? Do we need less stick? How would you categorize that? And do you think we need more carrot, I guess?
Again, I think there's an opportunity to clarify some of the ambiguity without getting too crazy, right? But when you allude to people and processes, the most frequent mistake that I see happen is an organization focuses solely on technology. This is going to fix my everything, right? And they put it in, and the technology does not deliver the value that they expected because they skipped people and processes. When you put a technology in, it's not going to do anything unless you've got people who can watch it and digest it and understand what's happening, in processes in place that when something happens, that you've got a very defined process to be able to quickly shut that down. It happens all the time. Technology should not be the focus. It has to be that three-pronged approach of people, process. A lot of the technologies, all the different solutions, they all do the same thing, right? So it's that people and process. I see it's a step that gets skipped way too frequently.
Anybody else like that?
No, I totally agree with it. But I mean, for me, I think one of the things that I did is I worked very closely with HR to make sure that they understand what what are the cybersecurity needs, whether it's IT or OT, because for HR, the help desk guy could be the network guy, and that's not necessarily true. So I actually had to create a little educational slide deck to show them that the help desk job is different than the networking security engineer and the endpoint security engineer and the application security. They're all different. And yes, they can be trained, but it takes time to get them up to speed to do the job. The second thing that I think is very important is, especially in the OT side, is we always done it that way, and processes were put together for 30 years, and technology has changed and the process has not changed. I believe a lot of the process can be simplified. A lot of the processes can be automated, use some kind of a sort automation or orchestration. It is possible. A lot of IT is doing it. For some reason, I get a lot of resistance in the OT side. And the other thing is, I believe that UX and technical depths are something that IT and OT needs to take a look at it, because you need to make it easy for the end users to do everything. I always believe if you complicate cybersecurity, people are going to find a way around it and they're not going to follow cybersecurity. So having a good user experience and reducing the technical debt, I see a lot of people throwing the can down the road, and it's the next group's problem. But sometimes a lot of these things come back, so we need to be very careful to make sure that improve UX, reduce technical debt.
And you know, I one of the things I would say is, look, we need to take a realistic look at our security budgets and our security spend, and we need to say, look, we can't take somebody who's an engineer on a shop floor and make him wear a 14th hat. It's in Mark and I in particular, right? We sell these tools. Well, when you're buying or looking at tooling or you're looking at services, you need to take a realistic look at, it's not a magic wand, right? Somebody still has to care and feed for these devices and these things that secure these devices. And if we look at it from a human health and safety aspect, everybody tells you, hey, their people are their most valuable assets. And Mark was talking earlier about people being able to get hurt. Well, we have to invest in these things, and so many of our companies across the states and globally have reduced headcount and trying to get skinny and trying to do this and trying to do that. I mean, I'll get on a little bit of a soapbox here and say, this is not a place where you can afford to cut, right? You need to invest in these areas. And whether that's through outsourcing or MSSP or hiring talent or any of those things, we've gotten to ridiculous places in some of these, in some of our critical infrastructure, to the point where we've got to swing the pendulum back a little bit.
Yeah, I think one other point on people is, education is of paramount importance to everybody in the organization. Everyone needs to own cybersecurity, especially at the plant level. When you're going to put in some disruptive technology, and you're going to have some downtime, things like that. If you don't educate the facility on what you're doing, when you're doing it, and why you're doing it, and how you play a role, they're not going to understand what's going on, right? And again, it sounds foundational or fundamental, but I see that step getting skipped as well. You absolutely have to let everybody know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and make them feel part of the process in order for it to be successful.
So, Mark, you kind of touched on this, and we talked about technology, and so what role can technology play in compliance and security policies, and what role does technology play in reducing cyber risk?
We're seeing an emerging solution set in the market. Just think about a software platform that allows you to plug in any framework, any compliance framework that you want. And then you go through a series of, I'll say, automated interrogation of your assets, electronic interrogation, but also interviews with key stakeholders. And this thing serves as a repository that, and I think, I can't remember who, I think Mario, he said, oh, we do our audit once a year, we're great. No. This thing is continuously monitoring your adherence to compliance, and it's tracking your progress against it, because you're probably day one, you're not going to be fully compliant. But it actually tracks the projects associated with becoming compliant and remediating risk. I think it's a game changer in the cyber industries to be able to. There's some smaller companies. We actually partner with one right now that's offering that service. I think you're going to see a growth in that automated compliance tracking solution set.
Totally agree with Mark.
Mary, you were already talking about that. You want to expand on that, or what you possibly done in the past to try to automate?
No. I think first of all, I tried to automate a lot of it myself, and we built a lot of very big and complex databases, and we use a lot of Spark to define specific dashboards. However, what Mark was saying is that there is a lot of new technologies, and to my mind, there are two technologies that I like a lot. One is called Vanta, the other one is Drata, which I have been using it a lot. And especially when you are using cloud services, it can actually real-time connect to actually monitor your compliance on the cloud. And that is very, very good.
So do you think some of this automation is actually going to help with the customer experience, be it from a plant user or from a public facing? And the reason we say, obviously, we're talking about energy today. So.
I think it has an ability. Sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Look, it's a little abstract, but I think that it has the ability to improve the customer experience. And I'm going to use an example of supplier auditing, right? That's, again, these platforms, again, are actually aimed at helping to go upstream to suppliers to be able to audit to see if they're compliant. And what's that a function of? Quality, right? So, I mean, if they go down, lead times change, things like that. And again, it's just one use case, but if you start to look at the entire supply chain and ensure that the entire supply chain is compliant, I think it minimizes the risk of disruption, cost of quality, and things like that. And I think it manifests itself in a better customer experience.
I totally agree with Mark. And one of my experience has been using these type of platforms to identify especially exceptions. There are a lot of policies that people wrote many years ago, and the solution is not fix the problem, but to create an exemption. And what I have used these platforms is to identify those things that always require an exemption. And actually, if we're always going to prove an exemption, why don't you just take it off the policy and save everybody a lot of work?
So we kind of danced around the subject and Dwayne kind of alluded to it a little bit. So how do you think energy companies, utility companies are dealing with skills gap, talent shortage? What are you using to tackle this challenge?
Is that for Dwayne?
I thought I weighed in, and I didn't want to go on a tirade about it.
By all means, please do.
Unfortunately, I think the answer is nothing. I mean, I hate to say that. It's probably going to cause a little bit of a backlash there, but it's not that the people. I think the problem ends up being the people that truly understand they need the help are maybe not well equipped or in the right place to make a difference there, right? So we maybe find a way to buy a little more tooling or do some things that are more automated, if we will. And we talked a little bit about that today. But look, I can't wave we've had some of these issues, right? I can't wave a magic wand. There's still data in and data out and anything, and there's still people in these processes. It's not buy a tool and everything fixes itself. And I think that's sometimes a little bit of a common misperception, unfortunately. Yeah.
Look, it's no surprise that there's a tremendous skills gap in the cybersecurity industry, right? We all know that, and it's exponentially acute in the OT specialist cybersecurity industry. So what do? You got to outsource. I mean, you got to identify your gaps and bring in someone who's done it before, who does it every day to try to fill those gaps. Because if you just cross your fingers and wait 18 months to hire somebody, the risk is big. That's the bottom line.
Fair enough. So what advice would you give energy leaders as the next step for maturing their compliance and cybersecurity policies? When do you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, I mean, my top advice is make sure that you have a good inventory of your hardware, software, and people skills. It is not easy to just move a person from one group to another. So the second advice is build a talent pipeline, hire interns. When those interns graduate, hire them out of school and train them. Get some of your good employees that you already have working on something else and cross-train them in cybersecurity. And then one of the programs which has been very, very successful for me, I built what I call is a extended cybersecurity team, where I actually got a couple of people in every group to become cybersecurity experts for their group. And if they did a very good job, they end up 1 or 2 years later getting a job offer to work for the cybersecurity group, right? Whether it's in IT or OT. And this is very good, especially in 2020 or in the oil and gas. There is a lot of ups and downs. The cybersecurity knowledgeable people are very valuable, so they never get laid off. So.
I think I'll go up a little level higher. I mean, everything Mario said in terms of people and talent, and we kind of touched on that. We also touched on some tactical things that everybody should be considering. But here's what I'll say. Do something and do something now. Because if you try to put the perfect plan together for the next 2 years, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when you're going to get hit. So there is no such thing as a perfect plan. So get out and take some of the advice that we gave, talk to other subject matter experts, but do something now.
Yep.
I'll just add to that. The good stuff there. A couple of years ago, I was talking to the North American CISO of a pretty large global. He used some pretty colorful language, but he said, "Look, we fixed that here, and here's what I did. I took this group of people." And this group of people, meaning IT and OT and InfoSec, and OT and InfoSec rather small, but also the guys that really knew how, the cash was printed and whatever they did. He says, I made them sit together. I gave them common projects. I gave them common goals, and I rewarded them for the success of the projects. None of this silo stuff, right? It's got to be done together. And that seems like a really simple answer. And it was probably harder to do than maybe he articulated, but he had a ton of success because, by and large, if we work together and we sit together and break bread, we're going to start getting along a lot better. And I think as an industry, we've all gotten somewhat better, but yeah, you sit next to the guys and gals every day. You're gonna start coming up with common solutions and things that work.
We actually did the same thing. Rockwell's a manufacturing company. Our CISO a couple of years ago demanded the exact same thing, Dwayne and Mario, right? Get together. I'm not asking, I'm telling. I think in terms of the time, Mario alluded to this. It doesn't happen in a week. It takes, maybe a year or several years to really get it well-oiled. But it's exactly what has to happen from an organizational perspective in order to be successful.
All right. So what do you foresee ahead in the regulatory futures? What do you see? What do you think is coming down that proverbial pipe?
More.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the same thing. More, definitely.
Well, definitely, if there are new major breaches, there will be regulations to. The government needs to do something, and they will do that. I mean, this is like what happened with the pipeline and the TSA, right? So I think there will be some new breaches and new things happening, and there will be some new regulations.
Do you think they're going to become more prescriptive, or there's just going to be more of them in general? And what I mean by prescriptive is thou shalt, more like kind of like a NERC SIP style, or are we going to continue down kind of the NIST CSF style of it's kind of a framework and you can kind of do what you want?
I think that if you make it prescriptive, it's going to create some problems in a lot of large companies be able to comply, and smaller companies will not. But I think we need both types of regulations, and companies that operate in different countries. There will be a lot of regulations mandated at a local level, not just in North America, right?
I think
And a
that
lot of it can be done. I mean, NERC SIP started with the US and now is fully utilized in Canada now. So I won't be surprised that NERC SIP will move on to other places.
Yeah, I alluded to ambiguity. In one man's opinion, I think, is yes, Dwayne, more of them. Yes, Mario, probably more prescriptive. But I fear that they may swing the pendulum too far to the right and get too prescriptive, and organizations won't, as I alluded to earlier, they won't have the ability to do what they're being told to do because of the lack of process, people, and technology. So if they do become more prescriptive, then there better be a time frame associated with allowing organizations to put the people, processes, and technology into place to be able to enable them to do what's being asked or told.
Fair enough. I think that finishes off what we want to talk about. There are a couple questions in the Q&A, and if you guys we got a couple minutes, it looks like. So if you're willing to answer some of those, it's going to probably kind of cross the gambit a little bit of what we've talked about. But Ali Aziz, I apologize if I have said your name wrong, asked how the organizations can address complexities of legacy systems, proprietary protocols, and interoperability challenges when implementing compliance and security measures. And can compliance frameworks adequately address dynamic and evolving nature of cybersecurity threats in OT/ICS environments, or is a more proactive security focus approach necessary? That was long. Like 3 questions in there. So legacy systems, what are the challenges in implementing compliance and security measures? Kind of what compliance frameworks, and is a more proactive security-focused approach necessary?
So in my opinion, legacy systems needs to be completely isolated and down at some point. It is crazy. I see companies bringing new technologies, new ERP systems, and they keep running the new one and the old one, and that makes it a lot more difficult and more complex. You need to set up a date. Yes, you may need to keep it for regulations issues, some of the information, but you don't need to keep using legacy systems. So if you have a new system, migrate the whole system, legacy system, to the new system, and just block off the legacy system. After 7 years, shut it down.
I'll take that on, and I'll add a little to it, right? And I go on a lot of site visits. I was in a mine not too long ago. They had some of Mark's gear, and those things are built like tanks. They run forever, but there is an end of life to them. And what I will say is, replace it. And I know what I just said. I just said get a big bucket of money out and do it. But look, I also worked in a part of the industry where more classic IT stuff got replaced every 3 or 4 years. So you've made tons of money, right? Automating whatever it is what you automated, right? Whether it be energy or anything else. It's time to reinvest in that technology and bring it up to date. It can't be safe if it's not secure, and it can't be secure if it's end of life 5 years ago and you're buying stuff off of eBay. I mean, you certainly got your ROI on it. Please, invest and do the right thing. And that probably make a lot of people mad at me, but whatever.
Oh, I love that. I love that message.
Well, of course you do, Mark.
No, look, this is the classic challenge is there are 20 and 30-year-old control systems that were designed to do one and only one thing. And what's happening, and we alluded to this, is every company is either in the middle of digital transformation or they're planning for it. And at its core, what is that? It's taking data from the ERP layer, driving it down to the manufacturing layer, and harvesting data from all of the data sources that could be a 20-year-old control system and pumping that up into ERP, shop floor to top floor, whatever thing we over 30 years we've been talking about, right? I feel as if you are able to monitor the traffic going in and out of that black box. And everyone's put Ethernet enabled cards into those things to try to do what we're talking about. I feel as if there are solutions and technologies available to help monitor and protect those 20-year-old black boxes. But to Dwayne's point, the security can only be taken so far in these things. And you really have to consider life cycling, upgrading, and so forth if you truly, truly want to be cyber secure.
But it's funny, comment on them. Brenda would, the eBay comment hits home. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think we're kind of at the end of our time. I really appreciate your expertise. Is there any parting words or anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Do the basics.
Yes.
Look, there's the thing we didn't talk about. Maybe you guys talked about this on the place where I wasn't here. I visit customers every day, right? And there's a huge number of things you could do for free if you just go look at CIS or any of the standards we've talked about today and do the very basic things. I heard Mark kind of call out specifically, please use the unique usernames and passwords. Please, single thread your computers. Please, there's a ton of stuff you can do for free. Please do that. That's insane when these, bad actors can go in and really knock us over on really kind of hygiene related stuff.
Yeah, good point. I agree, Dwayne.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to say thank you to everyone. You can see all of our names there. I'm going to assume all of us have LinkedIn. By all means, I think reach out to us if you have any questions or you'd like to learn some more.